Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, ar-Rahmanir Rahim, Maliki yawmiddin, Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'een, Ihdina siratal mustaqim, Siratal ladhina an'amta alayhim, Ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, Central Jersey community. How are you? I pray that everyone is doing well. And alhamdulillah, we're in the middle of our journey of understanding the Black American experience and unpacking racism. About 4 weeks ago, Imam Mendez and Imam Bashir started the ball rolling, helping us to begin to understand these issues and increase our knowledge about Islam, about Africa, and the Muslim presence in America. Last week, we were joined by Imam Dawood Walid and Ustada Maryam Sharif. MashaAllah, their talks have been fascinating and enlightening. If you haven't already, I urge all of you to visit the Central Jersey Masajid YouTube channel and set some time aside with your friends, with your family, to benefit from their wealth of knowledge and wisdom. Alhamdulillah, Summa alhamdulillah, this week we are honored to have two amazing intellectuals with us, two distinguished academics whose breadth and depth of research and scholarship is a living testament to the importance of knowledge and understanding and wisdom in our deen. Ustada Maryam Sharif is returning today, and she is joined by Professor Sylvia Chan Malik. Let me reintroduce Ustada Maryam Sharif. She will speak for about 20 minutes or so on the various slave rebellions in early American history, the Muslim role there, and some key organizations which participated in protests and the different type of protests that they used. I will then return, inshallah, to introduce our other distinguished guest, Professor Sylvia Chan Malik. As we introduced her last time, Ustada Maryam Sharif is an educator, a filmmaker, a lecturer, a linguist, a researcher, and a student. She has studied and conducted research in Egypt, Jordan, Israel, Italy, Palestine, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and the United Arab Emirates. She teaches for rabata.org and serves as an adjunct professor. She received her bachelor's degree in Middle Eastern Studies, amongst other things, from Rutgers University, and she has a master's in theological studies from Harvard Divinity School. It is my pleasure to once again introduce Ustada Maryam Sharif.
Jazakallahu khuli khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. All my dear beloved sisters and brothers from New Jersey, Central New Jersey, my home, my beloved home. And for those of you who are around the globe, please, we welcome you. Alhamdulillah, I'm so honored to be here. Assalamu alaikum. Ya Rabbi ashri li sadri wa yassir li amri wa ahlul uqdah min lisani yaqdahu al-qawli. Allahumma ameen ya Rabb. إن الحمد لله نستعينه من شرور من أنفسنا وسيئاتنا وأعمالنا. Ya Rabbil Alameen, guide my tongue and guide my words. And O Allah, we ask of you that this be of benefit to all of us and be, inshallah, a witness for us on the day in which there will be no shade. Walhamdulillah, I have the wonderful task before me to speak about civil war, the African American contribution from civil war to civil rights. Walhamdulillah. And so I will begin with a short talk. I will begin with a short paragraph in regards to the Civil War, and then end with the civil rights. So many things to say, and I certainly can't get through them all. There were so many Civil War fighters and figures by name. Some of them we knew, and by name, some of we didn't know. And if we go back into Dr. Jackson's course, and he talks about the Islamizers who were predecessors to the civil rights leadership and participants. We're going to talk about those people and the strategies that they used and the organizations that use those strategies. And I want to begin with a verse of Quran. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولتكن منكم أمة يدعون إلى الخير ويأمرون بالمعروف وينتهون عن المنكر وأولئك هم المفلحون. Let there arise out of you a band of people inviting to all that is good, enjoining what is right, and forbidding what is wrong. They are the ones who attain felicity. And this is in Al-Quran Al-Kareem, Surah Al-Ali Imran, the 104th ayah. We mentioned last week they came before Columbus, which is talking about Muslims who were here in 1619. So we're going to jump to the 1830s, where there was sort of a mass conversion of Blacks to Christianity. This period that produced these Blacks, these revolutionary Blacks like Nat Turner and Denmark Vesey and Gabriel Prosser, again, all mentioned in Dr. Jackson's lecture. But then there were some Muslims, and these Muslims led in slave rebellions, or what I like to call uprisings. Many minority groups have had their contributions and accomplishments during the Civil War recognized, and one group of Americans have received little attention, and that would be the Muslims. In fact, Muslim Americans have served in virtually every armed conflict in what we call the United States. In the history of the United States, and they've left their mark on this, on every era during the Civil War, including up until now. Now, Muslims in the religion of Islam were largely influential in the abolition of slavery. Massachusetts Senator Charles Sumner, famous for his caning on the Senate floor at the hands of South Carolina Senator Preston Brooks, ever quoted the Quran on several occasions during his speeches attacking slavery. And then we find many Muslims, according to Amir Muhammad in Muslim Veterans of American Wars, that was published in 2007, as many as 292 Muslim last names appeared in troop listings for the Civil War, 1861 to 65. Of these, 10 fought in the Confederate Army, and 4 served in the racially segregated Union Army. In the Union Army, the highest ranked Muslim officer was Captain Moses Usman, who served with the 104th Illinois Infantry. The first person who I am going to mention very soon, we're going to get into some history of a few figures. Now, all of these Muslims contributed to the shaping of the United States during the Civil War. Despite this, as a group, they've received little to no recognition. This omission runs the risk of suggesting that Muslims did not actually play a role or even exist in the United States at the time. As we as a nation grapple with our relationship with the religion of Islam, it is imperative that we keep in mind the role Muslim Americans had in creating this nation. Some former slaves even fought to end slavery in the service of the United States Colored Troop. And then I would love if you can go to the next slide. This is a picture of Peter Salim. he was a very important figure. He actually fought in the Battle of Bunker Hill in Massachusetts and lived in Framingham. He's very important because he did kill an enemy captain, if you will, whose name I believe is Pitcairn. And he has a monument here in Massachusetts erected to the good things that he did for the country of the US of A. Next slide. And here we have the figure Nicholas Saeed. Now, Nicholas Saeed is very important to me. Why is that? So under the picture of the book, the autobiography of Nicholas Saeed, is my dear cousin, Precious Muhammad. Precious Muhammad did, so she's there with Hillary Clinton. And during Hillary Clinton's stint as Secretary of State, she allowed Precious to do a wonderful historical poster and poster series. The poster series is on the top left, and it chronicles all of the Muslims and presidents who had interactions with Muslims. Now, this poster series is no longer at the White House. However, it's at the Muslim Museum, the first international Muslim museum that I mentioned to you in Washington, D.C., that I hope that you get a chance to visit. So Nicholas Saeed was a really important person. He's a former slave that fought in the service of colored troops, and his name used to be Muhammad Ali bin Saeed, also known as Nicholas Saeed. He was born in the Kingdom of Borno, located in present-day Libya, Chad, and Sudan, and enslaved after being kidnapped as a teenager, serving Arab, Turkish, and Russian masters. He traveled the world before being manumitted in England in 1859, and then he went to Canada and worked as a servant before immigrating to the United States in 1862. He then became a school teacher in Detroit, Michigan. The following year, Saeed enlisted as a private in Company I, 55th Massachusetts Infantry. There's a lot of Massachusetts going on, but you'll also see there'll be a lot of New Jersey going on. So he fought in the battles of James Island and Honey Hill after the war, and he settled in the South and started schools for Black children during Reconstruction. He's also known to have written his own Bible, except when it was checked, it happened to be the Quran by heart, which was not unusual for those who were from Africa who used to write on a lawh, the wooden or on a bone preservation method to learn how to memorize Quran. So he had written his own. So they said that it was the Lord's Prayer, but it was really Al-Fatiha. And then I want to move on to the next slide. So this is Muhammad Ezeldine, who was in and out of New Jersey and Philadelphia. In the bottom right-hand corner is a picture of his school where he used to instruct primarily African Americans, but some other Muslims in the Arabic language and Usuluddin. You will see pictures of women and children and some immigrants who went to this school. It was really important for Muhammad Ezeldine to utilize this school as a political social organization. He contributed to civil rights in this way, and he really cared about African American people and their plight, and he cared about their souls and wanted them to be Muslim. Top left-hand corner shows him speaking to some people who were his students outside. He's on the right-hand side. And then there's a picture of him in a fez in the bottom left-hand corner. He was really important as well because that school stayed established for a really, really long time. Next slide. And here we have Noble Drew Ali and the Moorish Science Temple. Again, another huge figure. As Dr. Jackson said, he was an Islamizer, which meant that he had a prototype of Islam. There were parts of Islam, there was nomenclature of Islam that he used in his organization, and he introduced people to the religion of Islam as early as the 20s. Now, Noble Drew Ali was, who went under a lot of name changes, was born in 1886, and do remember this is when the Civil War is just about to start wrapping up. As a proto-Islamic leader, they were on their way to being Islamic. And there is a wonderful following of Noble Drew Ali, and last week I mentioned that he was a friend of Marcus Garvey, and also Marcus Garvey would say nice things about Muslims and Islam because of his understanding from Noble Drew Ali, and it influenced his Back to Africa movement. On the top left-hand corner, you will see a book called Number 7 Quran. It does have inserts or excerpts, excuse me, of the Quran al-Kareem in it. It also has a hadith, but he doesn't name them as such because the people he's preaching to or proselytizing to or calling to don't have access to Arabic language. They don't have access to Quran, but this temple that he established and called it, or organization he established, the Moorish Science Temple. And the Moors referred to the Moroccans. That is how we refer to in Othello the figure who comes from Morocco as a Moor. And the Moorish Science Temple talked about religion, talked about science, religiosity, and being an upright person and being a divine person in the reflection of Allah and the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So culturally, he used nomenclature in which he was an influencer. For instance, the whole movement to stop eating pork. This all started way back when. So in the African American community who are not Muslim, they frown upon pork or pork eating. Of course, there are people who eat it, but he influenced the people through his religion and language. He would make up words and etc. Next slide. This is a picture of two early Ahmadi communities, and the Ahmadi community in the US amongst African Americans was very much so influenced and very popular, again, especially in the 20s and 30s, and I know Dr. Chan Malik will speak more about that community. And the reason why I wanted to touch upon them is because until now, with jazz musicians, and musicians in general, and sports people, they were very effective with having people come to Islam. And as you see, there are early African Americans in this picture. Again, a group of men and women who went to worship in these organizations. And they were proselytized to by what we would now call those from Pakistan, from the Ahmadi community. Next slide. And then we have Muhammad, Ali, and Malcolm X. And since I know that I'm not going to talk a lot about them because I know we're going to go further into the life of Malcolm X, but I do want to mention, as far as civil rights is concerned, Muhammad Ali was a, well, people called him a Dodge drafter when it was mandatory to go into service into Vietnam and fight against people. And many people didn't know why they were fighting, and he objected. He was a conscientious objector based on religion, and he lost his boxing titles because of it. And then Malcolm X, no need to also say that his wonderful contribution globally for the civil rights of African Americans in the United States, and also just globally, his thinking and his reach internationally to international figures who he met with when he traveled overseas, both after Hajj, before Hajj, in African nations and other nations in Muslim majority countries, and how it influenced how people became Muslim in the United States, how much he cared about the rights of the people who were downtrodden, who were poor, who were needy, or just neglected. Next slide. And then I wanted to quickly touch upon how Islam and African Americans, there is emergence of poets and spoken words in the 60s predominantly, when the civil rights movement was at its height. There is a book here chronicled, The Nation of Islam and Black Consciousness, which features the upper right-hand corner. You'll see a picture of Amiri Baraka, who was a poet who died last year. Amiri Baraka was a part of the group called The Last Poets, a very influential spoken word, you can say musical group. And then there's a picture of, and that's him on the bottom, and there's a picture of Sonia Sanchez, and I wish that I could read at least one of their poems. I hope that Dr. Chan Malik reads something from Dr. Sonia Sanchez, because it's really powerful. Now, Sonia Sanchez used to be in the Nation of Islam, and she speaks about the Nation of Islam from 1971 until 1976, and then she left after that. And then one of the things I remember that she said about the Nation of Islam and its influence is that a nation needs the strength of a man and a woman. And for those things, she was impressed by the Nation of Islam. This book, The Nation of Islam and Black Consciousness, is a series of poems and talks about the poets and their activism vis-a-vis this particular art. Next slide. And then we are definitely going to talk about Imam Warithuddin Muhammad, Allah yarhamhu. I mean, I wanted to really play a clip about him. And last week I mentioned to you that he was, as his name states, Warithuddin, he was the inheritor of the religion of Islam in America. And at his hands, 22 to 28,000, it is estimated, converted to mainstream Islam. Now, the reason why this is so important was because during that time when people were struggling with their identity, he kept saying, no, no, no. Islam, I am Muslim and I am American. And as you see him flying that flag there in a, that's a congressional house. You see that flag in the top right. And then the picture, the CNN picture, top left and bottom right. The bottom right, he is giving the first, he was invited for the first interfaith congressional, it was a celebration for President Clinton, and he stood up there and he recited a portion from Quran. And I wanted to play it for you, but I can't because we don't have time. But he recited it in Arabic and he recited it in English. And then he said, and Allah is the best of knowers of the truth. He started with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and ended with Sadaqallah al-Azim. That's super powerful. And then again, in the bottom left-hand corner, it is the flag that you'll see that was part of his community, the world community of Al-Islam, which went through a lot of name changes, but you'll see it's of the Quran. So the gold sort of lines are pages of the Quran, and it says, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. Next slide. I want to talk about Amina Matthews, who is such a wonderful, wonderful woman. So Amina Matthews is running for a congressional seat against, let's see if I can remember his name. She's one of the key players. One of the reasons why I mentioned her is because she's one of the key players in the Violence Interrupters. And she's a dynamic person who has an approach that's at the forefront of anti-violence activism in the Chicagoland area. She currently is running for the 1st District congressional seat against Representative Bobby Rush. And she's also known for her role in the documentary The Interrupters, which aired on PBS. So you see her in the top right-hand corner with on the Colbert Show. Then she is running. You see some pictures of her congressional campaign. In the middle, in the pink, she got an award. It was from an African-American group, but she got an award from her performance in The Interrupters. Next slide. And then there is the media. How media, African-American Muslims use media. So either they use newspapers as a medium, radio as a medium, and this is a picture of the Muslim Journal, which started in 1960 at the hands of Malcolm X. It's still alive today. And you see Duse Muhammad Ali, who I mentioned to you was a Sudanese, Egyptian, American journalist and a playwright who had his own newspaper. Inshallah, thank you so much. I hope I went through all of the slides. There's so much more I could say, but I'm out of time. Walhamdulillah.
Jazakumullahu khair, Ustaza. Always a pleasure and such a learning experience listening to you, helping us understand our rich history here. It is now my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Professor Sylvia Chan Malik. She is an associate professor in the Departments of American and Women's and Gender Studies at Rutgers, New Brunswick. She directs the social justice program there. Many of us are familiar with Chaplain Qaisar Aslam from Silru. Dr. Chan Malik chairs the faculty advisory board for Silru, for the Center for Islamic Learning at Rutgers University. She teaches courses on race and ethnicity in the United States. She speaks frequently on many issues related to Islam, gender, racial and gender politics in the US. Her work has appeared in media venues such as NPR, Slate, The Intercept, The Daily Beast, PRI, Huffington Post, Religion News Services, and many more. Mashallah, she holds a PhD in ethnic studies from the University of California at Berkeley, and she's also on the advisory board for the Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative, Muslim ARC. It is our honor to have a distinguished academic like Professor help us again to understand a little bit more about the issues that we're studying today. What she's going to do is she's going to talk about some key events that happened within the Black American experience in the United States, the Great Migration North, the Pan-African movement, what was Islam's role in emergence as liberation theology for the Black Muslims in general. So again, it's my honor to introduce Professor Chan Malik.
Jazakallah khair, Zija. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much to Central Jersey Masajid Initiative for having me come speak. I'm so grateful and honored for a chance to engage with a community that I feel that I am a part of. I'm located here in Central Jersey. I'm going to take a minute to share my screen, and inshallah, all the technology works well. So here we go. Okay, and I'm actually going to make this. Okay. Actually, okay, I'll just leave it like this. It's easier for me to toggle to the slides. So thank you so much again for having me. I'm actually going to take a slightly different path. I'm going to take us on a historical journey, but I'm going to do it through a bit of storytelling, hopefully, inshallah, that I can get through in about 15 minutes. And the story I would like to tell you this evening that I believe gives us a good sense of the Black American experience in this country in this period that tonight's lecture is addressing, this period between the Civil War and the Civil Rights eras, right? Is a story that I believe is rich, unheard, and unknown for the vast majority of us in what Sister Jamila Karim, Dr. Jamila Karim, calls the American Ummah. We live in a particularly interesting and fascinating place where Islam has had a distinctive, rich, and storied life that so many of us as Muslims in this country are not aware of. And it is my hope and my prayer that all of us, including our children, come to know this story so we can better understand where we've come from, where we are, and where we're going. So I want to start today with an image and tell a story of this picture. As you can see here, and hopefully maybe if you can make your screen even bigger wherever you are, you can see that this is an image of 4 African-American Muslim women. And what is significant about this image, and what I write about in the first chapter of my book, which is titled Being Muslim, A Cultural History of Women of Color in American Islam, is that this is the first known image of Muslim women in community taken in the United States. This is not to say there were not images of, there were not Muslim women before this picture, that there were not other groups of Muslim women, but this is the first known photograph of Muslim women in a group in this country. And as you can see here, it's 4 African-American Muslim women dressed in clothes that look like possibly their church clothes, with their scarves and coverings made out of what seems to be bed linens and sheets. This picture was taken on the south side of Chicago in December of 1922. And again, it's quite small, but if you look at the caption here, it says 4 American Muslim ladies, right to left. That's significant. Mrs. Thomas, Sister Khairat, Mrs. Watt, Sister Zainab, Mrs. Robinson, Sister Ahmadiyya, and Miss Clark, Sister Aisha. So for us Americans, or for those, for those of us reading this from the West, that's a rather odd configuration. Right to left, but it makes sense, right? Because this photo appeared in an Islamic journal, which I will tell the story of in a minute, which was run by someone from South Asia. So Urdu script, as well as Arabic script, goes from right to left. So our question is, was this meant to denote the women going from right to left, or was it meant to denote the women going from left to right? But we're not sure about whether that was a typo or not. So so in order to identify the women, right, I was trying to find a woman named Sister Florence Watts, right? Because this was one of the women that I was able to trace in this picture in my research throughout her entire life. So as I did this work, I came to understand that I will never know whether Florence Watts, otherwise known as Sister Zainab, is this sister here, right? Or this sister here, because it depends on whether you're reading the names from right to left or left to right. Now, how did I find the story of Sister Zainab? Well, the question I asked when I saw this picture was, how did these women come to convert to Islam? What was their story? These working class African-American women on the south side of Chicago in the 1920s, why and how did they convert to Islam? And this took me down the path of my work. And so I first was able to find the names of these women in a document, in a publication called The Muslim Sunrise. And this was a publication of a group that Sister Mariam mentioned in her beautiful presentation called the Ahmadiyya movement in Islam. And as some of you may know, it's a controversial movement in Pakistan, right? But it was one of the earliest missionary movements proselytizing Islam in the United States. And from the inception of arriving in the United States in the 1920s, the Ahmadis kept records of all the converts. So you can see here, very small, I found the name of one of the women in this picture, Mrs. Florence Watts, here in this journal, Mrs. Florence Watts, Zainab. So she had been noted as converting to Islam in the journal, and her name is there. And so with this information, I was starting to piece together her life of this working class Black woman. And I found that she was born in Ellicott City, Maryland in 1878. She's one of 6 children. I traced her to be working in Washington, D.C. in 1900. And then in 1920, she's found in Chicago. I did this through census records. Right? And she's married to a man named George Watts, and she has a daughter named Honorelia Watts, who was born in 1912. And in 1922, exactly around the time this picture is taken, she converts to Islam through the Ahmadiyya movement in Islam at the age of 44. And very sadly, less than 15 years later, 11 years later, she passes away in 1933 at the age of 55. So when I was able to find this woman, this working class African-American Muslim woman in the archives, I was thrilled because it gave me a concrete image and story and history of a woman's life, right, that was indicative of the larger history of Islam in America. And so as a scholar, what I set out to do was try to reconstruct, right, the forces that may have shaped Florence Watts's conversion to Islam. And so in order to understand this, right, I wanted to think about what was going on in the larger, right, American context, also within the context of African Americans in the country in this time, in the early 20th century. And so as you can see here, the phases and shifts of Islam in this country are roughly divided into 4 periods. From the 1500s to the 1800s, Islam was predominantly a religion that was practiced by enslaved Africans to the Americas. And then from the 1920s to the 1970s, which is the period that we are focusing on in tonight's session, Islam re-emerged in Black communities in what is called the post-Reconstruction North. And then you have the post-1965 period and the post-9/11 period, which we will not be talking about today. But in focusing on this second period here, the 1920s to the 1970s, why did African Americans start converting to Islam in large numbers at this time? What was it about this moment? And again, Sister Mariam talked about so many important groups and histories, Marcus Garvey, the Moor Science Temple, the Nation of Islam. But what exactly was going on at that time that led Black Americans to choose Islam as their new way of life in this tumultuous time in the United States? Well, there is the larger context of the Great Migration. Between World War I and World War II, over 1.5 million Black migrants moved from the South to cities like Detroit, Cleveland, Philadelphia, Newark, St. Louis, New York, and Chicago. And this is called the First Great Migration. And they moved north for exactly the reason you might think they moved north, right? Slavery was formally ended through the passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865. And in the period following, African Americans, formerly enslaved Africans, were seeking a better life, post-enslavement. Many of them wanted to stay in the South. They were now formally and legally free. But what happened was, despite this legislated freedom on a federal level, right, there emerged a regime of racial terrorism in the South, right? And so this is the period that people call the Jim Crow South. And so the primary cause for African Americans going north was racial terrorism in the South. There were widespread practices of lynching, more than that, just general segregation, injustice, lack of access, violence, a reign of terror. And this is a time when the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, all these white vigilante, white supremacist groups come to really shape the culture and life of the South. Right? In this time between 1877 and 1950, more than 4,000 African Americans are lynched. And that is only the ones that we have on record. That does not include the countless other lynchings that we don't know about. Of all the cities in the North, Chicago attracts more migrants from the South than any other place. You can see here, and I'm happy to share with folks this map and these slides if people want to see them afterwards. You can see here the different places that people traveled from and where they went. And as you look at the places that they traveled to, Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, New York, Washington, Newark, New Jersey, right? All these places, you start to understand that these are actually the places that Islam takes hold in the North at this time, right? And so why would Islam be a religion that newly arrived Black migrants from formerly enslaved situations into these northern urban cities? Why would they want to convert to Islam? So this is the question I want to talk about for my last 5 minutes or so. Right? And then think about the ways in which that has shaped the presence and legacy of history of Islam in the United States to take us into the period, which is your next session, to think about Brother Malcolm X, Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, and then Imam Mu'addin. In the North, there were these vibrant centers like Chicago. This is an image of the south side of Chicago, a neighborhood called Bronzeville, where the vast majority of African Americans lived at this time in the 1920s. It was called the Harlem of the Midwest, right? There were arts. You can see from this depiction how bustling it was. However, when migrants arrived from the South, they often only had the clothes on their backs, perhaps one suitcase. And this is an image, as you can see from the caption, of a Negro family just arrived in Chicago from the rural South. And so for those of you who may be immigrants or you understand making a big move, what is the first thing you want to do when you get to a new place? What is the first thing you want to do when you arrive in a strange land? And that is find community. Because while these African Americans, these formerly enslaved peoples, were traveling from the South and the North to get a better life, what often met them was slums and extreme poverty and the same forms of racism, just in a different context that they had encountered in the South. And so you can think about what they must have felt like and the mindset they were in at this time, right? New people in a new land, formerly from mostly rural places, now in the urban North, right? And in a totally different environment. And in these northern cities, there is a spirit of liberation in the air. And one of the prime voices of this liberation is a man named Marcus Garvey, who is encouraging Black people, right, to rise up, right, build their own communities, right, and even return to Africa under a banner of political ideology that he calls Pan-Africanism. And Garvey says that Black people worldwide need to come together and rise up. And in thinking about this, he suggests that Islam, even though he never converts himself, might be a more suitable religion for African Americans than Christianity, because Christianity has a history of being manipulated and used to enforce white supremacy and racial violence. So in this atmosphere of Pan-Africanism and Black liberation, these leaders, again, which Sister Maria mentioned in her talk, people like Noble Drew Ali and later Wallace Farad Muhammad, who would be the founder of the Nation of Islam, they come into this moment. And so the one person I want to end with to focus, to think about, back to Sister Florence, Sister Zainab, and the women in that image, is Mufti Muhammad Sadiq, who was a missionary from the Ahmadiyya movement in Islam, who arrived in this country in 1919 in the port of Philadelphia on a ship called the SS Haverford. And Muhammad Sadiq realized right away this moment of liberation for Black people and the spirit of Black nationalism in the air. And he immediately, in his writings, in the Muslim Sunrise, in the publications that his organization was putting out, spoke directly to Black Americans about the fact that Islam was the true salvation of the American Negroes, as you can see in this slide. He writes here, and I'd like to read it. I'm going to end in about 2 minutes. He writes that Islam is the real solution of the Negro question. My dear American Negro, Assalamu alaikum. Please, peace be with you in the mercy of Allah. The Christian profiteers brought you to from your native lands of Africa, and in Christianizing you made you forget the religion and language of your forefather, which were Islam and Arabic. You have experienced Christianity for so many years and has proved to be no good. It is a failure. Christianity cannot bring world brotherhood to the nations, so now leave it alone and join Islam, the real faith of the universal brotherhood. So Islam enters the lives and the consciousness and the spirits of Black people at this time of extreme migration and upheaval and community formation as a form of liberation theology. It enters their lives as a spark that gives them an entryway to another world. So in the example of Mufti Muhammad Sadiq, who is coming from South Asia, he is teaching the women, such as the women in the image, about the ways that Muslim women in his home country dress. And here are some images of South Asian women, right, from the Punjab, where he is from, dressed in clothing of that time. And you can look at these images and look at the images of the 4 American Muslim ladies and see the ways in which the types of things they had in their linen cabinets and under their beds, they tried to take these blankets and try to craft themselves like their sisters around the world. And I just want to end with the idea that Islam in America, from the Civil War period to the Civil Rights period, was a cry for justice. It was a cry for freedom, for liberation from the tyranny of white supremacy. For women, it was also a desire for gender justice, right? From the particular harshness that Black women suffered under the auspices of white supremacy, the sexual violence, the degradation, right? It was also a desire for Black people in the United States to connect with Muslims worldwide and to be part of a global religion, right? And it was also a form of community building that African Americans and non-African Americans, right, could have together, right? And it was a desire and an ethos that I think we have in our legacy as Muslims in this country to this day. The African American practice and presence of Islam in this country reminds us that Islam is a symbol and a beacon, right, of anti-racism and liberation in this country. And I will just end with the prayer that we always remember this legacy. We remember why these 4 American Muslim ladies, as they were called at the time, wanted Islam as a new way of being, a new way of growing closer to God, and a new way of participating in the world as full human beings. Jazakallah khair. I thank you so much for your time tonight, and may you all be well. Thank you. Alhamdulillah.
Jazakumullahu khair. We were always have this idea of historians having a very boring life and, just poring over records. But the one glimpse that you shared with us, that you look at this photograph and then you go do detective work to try and figure out through census records, through looking at periodicals and what have you, to try and piece the puzzle together. MashaAllah, that is so fascinating. We'll turn over to questions now. We have one question, and perhaps both of you can chime in with your perspective on this. The question is, why is Islam often taken out of the Black American narrative or American narrative in general when it comes to mainstream education?
I just talked for a very long time, but Sister Mary, do you want to take that first? I definitely have my ideas.
I'm gonna let you handle that one first.
Okay. Well, I think so that's a wonderful question, because I actually start so many of my classes on Islam in America by asking students in what context they've heard about Muslims. So they've heard about every single terror narrative you can think of. They've seen a million movies about terrorism. They've seen, politicians talking about Muslims as Arabs, as foreign, as over there, oil politics, etc. I say, have you ever learned anything about Islam in the United States? They say no. Right? And so this is an issue that we have with so many different groups in this country, people of color, marginalized groups, and we're seeing now the ways in which, with the Confederate statues and everything coming down, that this is producing a crisis in this country. And so what we have in this country is a crisis of knowledge and a crisis of narrative, in which there has been a dominant power structure for a very long time that wants to create myths about who we are as Americans. And it does not allow for a multiplicity and a plurality of voices. This country is a Christian, European nation, and Islam does not fit into the grand narrative of what certain people who hold power want to tell about the founding and evolution of this nation. And so this is what obstructs, right, Islam and Muslims from being part of that narrative. And also African American, the information, right? I had to go and dig up all that information about that woman. There is so much to be found. And so, just in terms of why African American historians have left it out, you have to have people who are invested enough to go find these stories, because they are not easy to find, right? So there's, there's layers. There's, kind of the larger power structure that marginalizes and sidelines certain stories. And then there is the work of those like Sylviane Diouf, like Edward Curtis, like Precious Muhammad, who have to, and like Mariam Sharif, who have to go out and dig up this history and really write it, create it, document it, put it in the archive so that we can all have access to it. And I think that's happening right now. And inshallah, it will continue to blossom and grow as our community grows and blossoms and finds its way as well, inshallah.
Beautiful.
So sorry, I have a lot of ideas about that question.
And in addition to that, last week I mentioned, please visit the America's Islamic Heritage Museum. That information is there, and we need help chronicling it. And it's not the best museum. The museum down the street, the Smithsonian African American Museum, is awesome. But our little fledgling Muslim museum, it is fledgling, but it's so important. It has the information right there.
Yes, Jazakumullah khair. And I think one of the things that's apparent from these sessions is we in our communities have been remiss in not inviting you folks on a consistent basis to help us think through and educate ourselves about this. There are so many wonderful, powerful stories here. The piece, Dr. Chan Malik, that you read about at the end, the liberation theology message of Islam, that resonates so powerfully with us. The messages that you gave on the experience that Black Americans have as a migrant, that resonates with so many of us, but we kind of put that aside. So many of us from India and Pakistan and the Arab states and Bangladesh are all migrants. So we only go back one generation when we can remember coming off a plane with very little possessions. And the first thing that you look for is a home and a community. And where are we going? We're going to those places where the African Americans migrated to.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Unfortunately, we don't have that much time, but I would ask one quick question, 10 seconds each, if you guys can take. What one resource, a book and a documentary or a movie, would you folks recommend, which takes off from what you've talked about and helps us, in our journey of learning?
Do you want to go, Mara?
I will totally go first. Oh man, okay. I gave you a lot of them last week. So as for documentary, please see The Interrupters. It's a documentary that's available on PBS, and it is about civil rights activism from Amina Matthews, and it gives you a taste of what's going on. As far as a book is concerned, I would say Edward Curtis's book on Muslims in the military that came out in 2017. So it chronicles all of the history of Muslims' participation and names and etc. throughout the first wars fought in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. I was actually going to name one of Dr. Curtis's books as well. He actually has a very short book called Muslims in America, which is a wonderful kind of overview. He also, I'm going to name more than one. I'm a professor. He also has another wonderful book where he talks about Black Muslim theology, right? And he documents Malcolm X, Edward Blyden, Elijah Muhammad, and others to think about the ways in which they thought. I am going to be shameless and plug my own book, Being Muslim, A Cultural History of Women of Color in American Islam, not because I wrote it, but because I think the stories of Black women are so central to the history of Islam in America. And the stories like the one of the 4 women in that image, Betty Shabazz, Dakota Staten, the women in the Nation of Islam, I think tell us a story of Islam in America that we're not familiar with, that we have not had access to. A wonderful film, I think a wonderful film that tells a great story about Islam in the United States is New Muslim Cool. If anyone has not seen that, it's the story of Hamza Perez, who's a Puerto Rican rapper and convert to Islam. It's a wonderful film. Also, Zarina Graywall's film about Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, which is called By the Dawn's Early Light, is also another wonderful film. So I would highly recommend those for people wanting to get more informed about the issues of race and history that shape our deen in this country.
Jazakumullahu khair. It is Maghrib time, I believe, so we have to bring this session to a closure. But inshallah, one of the things that we will do is to invite both of you back in a different session, perhaps to expound more on the books that you've written, maybe do a reading from some of your books for the community, expound on the research that you've both of you have conducted in various parts of the world. I think it is so important for us to continue on this path. On behalf of the Central Jersey Masajid, I once again want to thank both of you for making time from your busy schedules to help us give these wonderful narrations of stories and historical facts and the correct version of history as opposed to the myths and that we are fed through mainstream education. Jazakumullahu khair. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put more barakah in your efforts. And inshallah, this will be the start of a good symbiotic relationship where we can benefit more from you. As I said at the beginning, I'll turn it over now to Ustada Sharif, if she can make dua and bring this session to a conclusion for us.
Inshallah, thank you. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, la ilaha illa anta subhanaka in kuntu min adh-dhalimin. Ya Allah, you have blessed us to reach these days of Dhul Hijjah in which you told us there is so much blessing in it. Ya Allah, bless us. Aghnina bil ilm, wa zayyina bil hilm, wa ikrimna bil taqwa, wa jamilna bil afiyah. Enrich us with knowledge and beautify us with forbearance and honor us with your God consciousness. and beautify us with good health, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Protect us from COVID, Ya Allah. Protect our families and take it far, far away, and our friends, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Ya Allah, please bless us to honor our ancestors and have us make dua for us to have people who will make dua for us, to have Muslims in this nation and all over the world who will make dua for us. We ask of you, Jannatul Firdaus, Ya Ghafoor, forgive us and forgive them their sins. Ya Allah, we ask of you, Al-Haq. Ya Allah, you are Al-Haq. You are the one who is the truth. Show us the true truth and guide us to everything that is on that path. And Ya Allah, protect us from falsehood and protect us from anything that's on that path. Ya Allah, make us in the best, Ya Musawwir, Ya Khaliq, in the best forms of good character, and make us to be righteous people who love those who are our neighbors. Let us be the callers to this Islam that you sent with Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam. Ya Allah, we ask of you the preservation of Islam here in this nation. Bless us and protect us, Ya Allah, and bless us to be inheritors of the deen. Ameen, ameen. Allahumma ameen.
Ameen. Jazakumullahu khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.